instead of sitting with my problems, which I'm getting more used to now, it'd be like, who's the expert that knows this? And that's what this person said on this podcast. And I had, a health coach and a emotional coach and then a business coach. And it just turned out I was getting so much like info, and that the root cause was I was just not feeling confident in myself to solve my own problems. And with experience, that's something I wish I had done more initially, was like I would try to absolve my responsibility by asking for help from others. And like it is important to get help, but I think it's also important, there's things like, hey, I'm setting up my HR, what should I pay for it? There's answers to things from people who've done it, but sitting more with my beliefs versus like strategic advisors and coaches was something that I wish I had done a little more earlier, is like believing in myself.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I very much appreciate it. Mile 40 continues to grow, and it is because of all your help and all your support in feedback and reviews for the show. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I look forward to sending those out. Today's guest is a guest I'm super excited to have on. I have Robbie Bent. He's the founder and CEO of Othership. Robbie, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, man. Appreciate being here.
Of course, dude. Listen, I want to start off by saying I had heard about Othership for a couple of months before I was finally able to walk through the door. And then when I walked through the door, it absolutely met the hype and more. And I just cannot believe how incredible of an environment you've been able to cultivate, create. And I've read up on a couple of the interviews that you've done before this with other people. And the question that I'm sure that you've gotten multiple times is, the idea of cold plunging and saunas, it's been around for a while. You see a lot of other people trying to create it, but you were able to do it in a way like no other that truly allows the individual to come out of that room ultimately finding themselves in ways that, perhaps they didn't expect going into the experience. Perhaps they thought they were going to the experience for health reasons, more for physical reasons. But, one of the things that really resonated with me is how I was able to unlock myself emotionally coming out of your class. And, this is not the typical way that I start the episodes, but I need to get to it right in front, because if anyone's listening to this episode, I want them to know why they need to go to Othership. And it as much as it is for the physical benefits, what I found it was also a big part of it was related to the emotional outcome that I got out of the experience. So let's start there. Talk to me a little bit about, now that you've been running for a little bit and you've been in business for a while, talk to me a little bit about, was this what you anticipated when you set out to build Othership?
What class did you try?
I went to the men's only class. That class with Brian Von Anken when he set that up. And I don't know the name of the other class that I went to.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's like one of the deepest classes. I mean, creating a space for men to share is pretty rare in New York. So that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, definitely it was not, this started in my backyard with some friends. So there was no desire for this to be a business. I was working in tech prior and finance before that. And so, it was really just, hey, let's do this cool thing where we create community in a neighborhood. And, it was free. And people would just show up and they would open a door on a gate on a street and just come in, and there would be towels and a fire going and an ice bath. And we started guiding people through. And it was just a way to kind of hang out with the neighborhood, to make friends with healthy people. So I just moved back to Toronto with my wife after living in different developer hubs in San Francisco and Berlin. I was working for the Theorem Foundation, and we'd moved back, and we really wanted to build a healthy community. And so we had this backyard space, and myself, another couple. So Othership started by two couples and a fifth best friend. So it's probably the only company in the world I've ever heard of that has two couples as co-founders. And it was just something that we were doing for fun. You know, we would be in the backyard and it would be a way to hang out, and it was a way to make new friends. And every day I would go out, you know, once you'd come once, you could come whenever you wanted. And it was just open. So, you know, it'd be the morning, I'd be having my coffee, I'd be outside, there'd be 3 friends from the neighborhood, we'd be chatting and hanging out. It was just like a cool way to meet people. And then that became, you know, during the winter, it was too cold out. So we looked at my garage, and I had this old, you know, kind of freestanding garage that was just collecting dust. It was like a woodworking space. And so by hand, myself and my partners, you know, we plumbed the space and painted everything and designed it and built an ice bath, you know, by hand, tiled it, brought in a sauna. And it really was for us at that moment. And it was just something like, oh, well, this would be cool to be able to use all the time. And then one of us worked the space each day, and we started charging like donations. And, you know, that grew to kind of 50, 60 people a day coming in, to over 1,000 members. And it was kind of in that space where I was like, well, this is really cool. But it was never really like a hot, cold space. Like, hey, let's get into recovery. Let's do something for health. It was just like, it's kind of a new version of a neighborhood bar, really. And that's what we were trying to build. And then all of us have background, you know, I struggled with drugs for a long time. And all of us have background doing things like Hoffman process, Tony Robbins, going to church, you know, psychedelic medicine retreats, Vipassana meditation retreats, all these things to kind of like feel into your emotions. And so there was a deep desire to create a space where people could feel like that's what Othership is first. Now, some of the things we had never imagined, like the sauna raves and like these parties that are awesome and super fun. That's not really what the brand is about. Like that, they're cool and fun, but it's always been about a space to like feel into your emotions and be seen as a human and share. And it just happens to be the hot and cold are what enables that. But that's, I think, what makes it special and different. You would never see on our website like longevity and inflammation and these kind of things. It's more just like, hey, this is a space to feel good now. This is a space to be a human being. And I think that's what's really catches people, that they're not expecting to go and, you know, there's a share circle happening that comes from men's work and psychedelic medicine retreats and group therapy, and this idea that you're syncing your heart rate and your heart rate variability together through something hard, and then you share, which like, doesn't really happen anywhere else in society as a consumer experience. So I think that's what's really different, unique, special. And that wasn't a business idea. That was just something we were doing and kind of like leaned into.
Well, we're going to dig into some of your personal history, because I think that definitely correlates to the theme, not only the show, but the brand. And, you know, one of the things that really stood out, especially in that men's night that I went to, was the fact that you're in New York, you are with 60 other guys, you know, sitting in the sauna, and the guys are opening up and they're sharing some of their most deepest insecurities, you know, amongst strangers. And that's not a common thing in New York, let alone in a lot of places, but especially in particular in New York. And, you know, to be able to kind of cultivate that kind of environment is incredibly special. And one of the things that I'm personally curious about is the design of the classes and how you train the people that work for you, and how you kind of build out that programming. I had never seen anything like that before. Where did that come from, and who was behind that?
Yeah, so it's just iteration. You know, it's like, oh, Othership, I heard about it, but it's me working on it for 6 years, every single day. And so, you know, the first class was by accident, really. It was just in the garage, and people are showing up for the ice bath, and like, they don't want to hear, hey, this is increasing, you know, your white blood cells and your immune system. Like they need to get into this like hard experience. It's similar to like jumping out of a plane. For a lot of people, it's probably the scariest thing they'll do all year. So it was like, how do you actually create an experience around this? And the very first one was my co-founders have created almost all the classes from scratch, Harry and Amanda. And the very first one happened by accident. We were just all there on Valentine's Day, 3 couples. And we're kind of sitting around. We're like, you know, they're like, oh, well, why don't we go in the plunge together? And that was like pretty, you know, it sounds silly, but that was revolutionary at the time. There was no group plunges. It was something you did alone, you know? And so we'd have 2 people go in together, eye gaze with your partner, kind of sync your breathing, come out, give each other a hug to warm up, and like, again, sync your breathing. Then the couples would go into the sauna and would share their first date story, and then would give a little massage to their partner, you know, and then you would switch. And all of a sudden people are kind of crying. It's like, whoa, this is really cool. And we kind of, oh, you know what? Like nobody's on their phone, but you're also not exercising. So you're super present. And then there's the endorphins from the ice bath. So you're like ultra present. So it just kind of became clear that this was a very interesting platform to do programming, and nobody had really done that before. And so that led to other ideas. We had, Harry and Amanda were trained. They're trained like off-goose ritual and sauna masters, and trained in like steam rituals, the aromatherapy, the towel waving. So that is inspired by what's happening in Europe and Germany specifically, this ritual of off-goose. And so they trained over there for years in Europe. We also mix in a number of cognitive behavioral therapy style visualizations, and that comes from things like Tony Robbins and Landmark and Hoffman. We also mix in breathwork, so we have our own breathwork app, and we're trained breathwork facilitators. We also mix in sound, so Harry's a musician and artist, and so he'll pull from instruments like the gong, the guitar, the flute. We have some classes called sound immersion. So there's just a ton of different modalities as us being facilitators prior that went into this, and it just kind of has developed over time. So at first there were no classes. It was just, hey, people would come for this Valentine's Day thing. They would come for we created one called the Desert Storm, and it was 3 back-to-back saunas, each one getting progressively hotter, with the third one in the complete darkness. And in the darkness, we'd have a frame drum. We'd be playing it, and this came from the Temescal Sweat Lodge, and we'd have people share like things they wanted to let go of and do like a group scream. So that was the first time we'd done a scream in the dark, and that felt really good. Of like, wow, this is like a place where I can like in the city like open up and just release. And screaming in the dark, something like most people have never done, and that was just like a crazy release. So everything was sort of like guessing and testing, and even at that point, we're like, okay, I don't know if there's, it's just a 6-person little tiny sauna, and so we self-funded our first unit during COVID, which took like a lot of guts, and people were like, "You're crazy!" Like our landlord was like, "I don't even understand what you're talking about." Journalists, there's always haters, even since the beginning, which like, fuck, bring it on. But they, at first were like, oh, this is so stupid. These guys are jokers. It will never work. It's disgusting. Nobody will group sauna. It's like blah, blah, blah. And so it was nerve wracking to like, we self-funded the first one, cost about $2 million. And it was a big, big gamble. But we'd had the community, and we knew like, hey, there's something here. Like this feels, people are changing lives. They're, like changing their lives from coming to these like classes in the garage, and making friends with new people. And just, was getting so many messages about how impactful these sessions were. So we took the risk, we opened, and then, from that point on, Harry just designed all the classes, and we would collect so much customer feedback. And so, there was the class, the very first one was called Rose Thorn Bud, and it's a journey. It came from a meditation that him and Amanda would do at home with their sister and their kids. And so around the dinner table is like, you share your rose, your best moment of the day, your thorn, what you're struggling with, and your bud, what you're excited about. And so he created a class around that, and so on and so forth. And we would just sit and come up with ideas for classes. He would be on a camping trip, and he came up with this one called Emotions A to Z, which is idea of like, each week you would experience and really dive deep into 4 emotions, and you would feel them in your body. So it might be like anger, bravery, curiosity, despair. Some would be pleasant, some would be unpleasant, and we do that in a group. Then it just kind of spiraled of like, what is the customer asking for? So recently, we dropped one called Gratitude. And so Harry probably spent 200 hours creating that, and, went into Andrew Huberman podcast on gratitude, read all the background papers on like actually how scientifically you create gratitude in the body. And it's not just like a list. It's like legitimately thinking and feeling about times you're grateful for others, and times that they are grateful for you. And so those two, like walking in those stories, is what creates the ability to more easily feel gratitude. And so it's just an example of like, the classes aren't, hey, come one, come all, whatever it is. They're like produced almost like plays in some way. So, they're scripted. The audio is thought through and mixed and mastered. Breathwork is mixed on top. The smells with each scent change. But there's like an hour-long document for each class with the scripts of how it should work, how it should flow. And then, okay, so that was sort of, hey, there's 28 different classes, which I think is very unique. So there's been some competitors pop up, and they might have 5 or 6, but it's not a fitness class. It's more like you're watching a play, because you're not working out. And so it can get boring extremely quickly. Like, it's in some ways the guides are super important because you're not also working out, you're just watching them. So it is more of a performance. And so having 28 allows for you to not get bored. You can continue, because what I found is some classes are very emotional, very deep, very complex. And if you did it every week, it gets boring. Like you're used to it. So kind of my cadence is like, I don't like to do the same class on the emotional side within a 6-week time horizon, which means you need many more classes, which means the product is like so much more complicated and in depth. And so those were created all over time. And then once you have them, it's like, well, how do you train the people to do this? And how do you train them when you're not there? And so we've auditioned over 1,000 guides to date. Harry and Amanda have created all this from scratch. They've mastered the, like, what kind of questions are you asking? How does it, like, it starts off with a survey, then a video challenge, then like an in-person audition. And the audition is very much like you would audition for a play. And then after that, there's a 200-hour training program. And nobody before this really had the skill. You can't just open it in a city and be like, oh, we need a yoga instructor. Like, there's so many moving parts that are new and are combined in a new way. And so we created just a massive library around, tone of voice, holding space, hospitality, creating a share circle, the art of towel waving, aromatherapy, all the different blends that make up an Othership class. And then on top of that, it was like, how do you, for the first unit, it was Harry and Amanda training every guide and being in there. But then once you have 2, and then once you have another city, and then we're coming up to our 4th, you start to need to train the trainers. And so we've ran through, I think now 7 waves of guide training and have over 100 guides on staff. And I think like the majority of the time spent on the product, it's not like something where, hey, let's create a biohacking space and we'll like hire these guides and they can make the programming. Like we made every single word, every single playlist, every idea, like from scratch internally. And then everything is audited. Like, all the guides have these big breathers. They're all ranked. There's 8 levels they can rise through, which like determines their pay. And it's based on how they show up in the space and their skill level. And so I'm like most proud of that. I think that's like very difficult to replicate, as we've seen, a number of our guides have left and started their own, which is really cool. But to replicate the level of quality and training, that's like 5 years of work there.
Yeah. I mean, I keep thinking back to that $2 million investment that you said, and I can't imagine, this is what you had in mind back then. And your ability to ultimately iterate and get to this point. And, one of the things that you can't help but think about is as you're growing this business, you probably have to, answer to not only yourselves, but outside stakeholders, so on and so forth, with regards to your differentiators. Like, how are you truly differentiating yourself? I can tell you as a consumer, I know how you're truly differentiating yourselves. However, being able to show, the training and the resources that you've built out is a true testimony, right? Because it's not easy. It's not. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of hours that went into building the platform as it is today. That was one of the things that I kept thinking about while I was in the classes was, how many hours must have gone into the training of these people who are guiding us through this right now. So as a testimony to you, for sure.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, we hope it shows, so it's, the whole team is very anal about the details of everything. I mean, that's the training of the guides. There's also like the design of the space, the merch, the towels, every song that plays in the space is hand selected and like authorized by Harry. So people can submit songs, but our playlists are private, and we feel like the vibe in the space, every touch point and sensory part of the experience is like important, should be cultivated. So even the soaps and the shampoo are smells that we've designed that match the class itself. So just like literally everything, every touch point is custom designed, and we feel that that's what makes an experience excellent. And if you care that much about every detail, some of those details don't matter, and obviously the customer will not see, but as a whole, it creates a culture of excellence and like care for the product and the customer, which we call the journeyer. So I'm glad. I always love when people say like, wow, like really like So, I noticed that stuff, and it's
Oh,
cool.
absolutely. I mean, look, I think you'd be crazy not to notice it if you were to go into that class. Are the soaps branded by you guys?
Yeah, they are.
Do you sell them as a CPG product?
We do. So we actually, it's interesting. We've decided in a retail to not carry any other products but our own. And so every product that we make should be, a piece of clothing that can be worn that represents the brand, or something that you can take home that reminds you of the experience. So we sell, soaps, deodorants, incense. We've just finished our own electrolytes that we'll be gifting out when you come. It's like a nice touch. So it's an Othership electrolyte package, and the flavors are flavors that are a bit different. So things like yuzu, bergamot, they're flavors that match the smells of the snowball. So yeah, if you look in our retail section, every single item is like a custom designed Othership product.
Amazing. Yeah, no, last class I was given some incense and I didn't realize that it was Othership. That's awesome. That's incredible. And the soap is awesome too. So now I keep that back in my mind. And so all the listeners out there, take note. I want to make sure that with regards to our conversation that we dive a little bit into your own personal history, especially look, I think for anyone to create and cultivate a platform that brings about so much healing for their consumer base, I can't help but think that at some point in your life, and you had kind of alluded to it earlier, there must have been a call for healing for yourself. I feel like it wouldn't be as genuine and authentic, and really would not be as successful had not the person behind all this had to kind of go through their own journey of overcoming personal obstacles, or navigating their own uh, bottoming out, essentially. So talk to me a little bit about your own personal history, and then we can kind of tie it into the business.
Yeah, man, it's still going on now, even with 10 years of all these experiences. Last year was a huge, massive struggle. Was a new dad. Business was not failing because we were doing well in the stores, but had bit off way more than we could chew, expanded too fast without really understanding like what it was like to open New York, ran out of money. It was fucking tough, man. I was drinking coffee and vaping all day, like super stimulated, like at my max, super burnt out, still loving what I'm doing, but just like max stress. And so it's like somebody who's done all these practices and still like, holy fuck. But doing it with like a team and my wife, we made it through. But before that, what led to this, I think like I definitely struggled growing up with drugs and alcohol. So huge, would just, in high school and then university, loved partying, loved to be around people, loved to be social, loved dancing, loved to be out. But it turned into, my late 20s, would go out for dinner and would have a glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine. It'd be a Tuesday. I would get some cocaine and, would be out until Thursday morning, and would wake up eventually, like around when I was 30, it was like the worst. And I would wake up, under a park bench or somewhere. And so it was pretty tough. I lost my business. I'd moved back in with my parents. I felt pretty lost. I didn't really have a skill set at that time, or at least perceived one. So I'd kind of been in finance. I kind of started this company that had failed. I'd kind of worked in tech, but I didn't really I wasn't an engineer or designer. I went to, a standard business school. So I just like really thought, hey, I have no skills. I had no money. I think at one point in time I had maybe $60 in my bank account, and I'd have to ask my dad for money to get dinner and stuff as a kind of, 30-year-old, and was living in my parents' house. And so, it was tough. It just felt like everything at that point had been a failure. Everything I tried finance, the fund I worked for imploded. I, started this startup, like literally went bankrupt. We lost a ton of money of people who had invested, some including friends. I tried to get a job at Uber. I couldn't. I did this interview and they had this crazy test, and I remember prepping for it, and it was like a big Excel sheet, and I was like, my brain just froze, and I couldn't do it, so I didn't get that job. And I just was like, fuck, am I like I can't figure this out. I thought I'd done well in school. I always worked really hard, and I was just like, wow, I can't. Like, life is hard. I can't. It's not working for me. I didn't have a relationship at the time, so it's pretty lonely. So that was sort of the rock bottom. Was just like, I have no skills. I can't seem to get a job. You have no money. So I was down. And so I remember reading like the 4 Hour Work Week, and that was kind of my first foray into like personal work. And like Tim Ferriss, kind of the GOAT of, the first person to like talk about a lot of this stuff publicly. And I remember through that, I decided, hey, I'm going to face my fears. I was always really afraid of things. My mom is quite anxious. And so that was like passed to me. Like even now with work, I'm like kind of paranoid, but I would be nervous about getting in a fight at school or like going to the job interview. What are they going to think of me? And so at about 30, when I was at rock bottom, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try and do like really hard things, like the things that like scare me the most. So I got, a motorcycle license, a skydiving license, and I moved to Israel randomly because I thought, oh, that will be hard. I don't know anyone there. I'm not Jewish. I don't speak Hebrew. I'm going to go there, had an opportunity. I'm going to change my life. And so I lived there for almost a year. At one point in time, I was living on the border of Gaza, and there'd be like missiles firing and like missile drills where you'd go, and that's like pretty common there. But there's no Hebrew, you can't even read. So I was just like by myself in this small town on this border, and I was like, what am I in this like pretty shitty apartment? And I was just like, what am I doing here? Like, this is crazy.
How old were you then?
I was maybe like 32, okay. 32, 33.
Okay.
And then I, instead of coming home over Christmas, I'd always like done a little bit of meditation. It was like a high school project for me, a thesis project in English class, and I'd used Headspace. And so I'd heard about a Vipassana retreat, and it was free, it's by donation. So it's like, oh, maybe I'll do that instead of going home for Christmas and then paying for the flights. So I did this 10-day meditation retreat, and that sort of unlocked everything for me where I started to change. So it was that retreat where I started to learn about like, hey, I'm, person that needs stimulation. I can get angry. I'm self-conscious of what people think of me. I'm like embarrassed by certain things. It was, I'm very hard on myself. I'm like very critical. So it was like, that was the first time where, 10 days of meditation, it's like 2 years of or Headspace every day, just like that. So it was the first time I realized like self-inquiry had strong value, and learned, because a lot of people are like, oh, meditation, I could never do this, like it's so hard. And at that retreat, one of my bunk mates was interested in psychedelics, and he invited me. So I went, to this random campus in the middle of Haifa, which is a place in Israel. And we met at like 6 a.m. and went out into this forest and took LSD. And that was my first time trying psychedelics. And it was a pretty interesting experience. Like, it led me to like start doing research on that space. So I booked an ayahuasca trip. I ended up leaving Israel, going to Peru, and doing this like, I was still drinking at the time. And that was a hard one for me to realize, like, okay, me specifically, if I drink alcohol, my whole life falls apart, because then I start looking for drugs and I disappear. And I couldn't it wasn't happening all the time, but when it would happen, it would be so disastrous. And I couldn't see like, oh, from my genetics, cannot do this. And so I went and did this ayahuasca experience in Peru, and I was there, did 4 ceremonies. And that's when I was like, whoa, I shouldn't be drinking. Okay. That's a new goal. So I moved back to Toronto, and through the combination of meditation and psychedelic medicines, got sober. And I met my wife, and our first date, she knew I wasn't drinking. So she, found out about these cold plunges. She was listening to Rhonda Patrick. And so we're really early to that. And so there wasn't even a cold plunge in Toronto. There was, we had to drive out to Mississauga to this like underground bathhouse, Russian Banya, to do a cold plunge. And that was kind of the first time I did a cold plunge in 2017. And that became part of our relationship and our rituals. And so every week we would go to these bathhouses. And that's how we learned about, the hot and the cold. And it just became part of my sobriety ritual. It became something I do 3, 4, 5 times a week, every week for, almost 9 years now. And when we travel, we would form groups and we would go together, and it would be something we did instead of going to bars. So it just was a long time before we even built the garage at home. That first ice bath to create a healthy community, we were just doing it in these different cities as a way to meet people and to be hanging out without drinking. So those pillars, like the meditation, psychedelic medicines, they also led me to start trying like once a year a challenge. And it's not as important as it was for me before, but I really, got my skydiving license. That was a challenge one year. I did a dark retreat where I lived in a cave for 8 days, just complete silence and darkness alone. I went to Tony Robbins. I did the Hoffman process. So every year I would try to do one like 7 to 10 day thing off my phone. It was like a mental reset. And I found those things combined with like, I've just also done a lot of therapy, group therapy, men's work, individual therapy, IFS, parts work, the whole thing. Even just listening to podcasts, I'll listen to like Art of Accomplishment, Joe Hudson, and I just love this kind of stuff about like really deep emotional inquiry and feeling emotions. And so that stuff that's been a passion for 8 or 9 years to try to stay sober, and like my living in my head is challenging. I'm really prone to addiction and stimulation and coffee, and very self-critical. And so these things were like just things I needed to survive. And now when using them all, and I know you're really familiar with all this work and do all this work as well. And it's just like, it's hard to piece it together on your own by yourself. And so with Othership, the idea was like, can we take a lot of this stuff and make it fun? So like the work is definitely challenging, but can we make it fun and like have like a bit of a swagger to it? And so it's like inspiring, so it's not like, oh, I'm on another Zoom call with my therapist talking about me being depressed at my desk. Like, could I do that, but in a group of people in like a cool environment with amazing music playing? And so I think there's really something to, like, for me, the mission of Othership isn't hot cold related. It's just like, could we create a world in where people do emotional work weekly, and as a result are less lonely because they do it in a group and they feel seen and heard and have a space. And that space used to be church, but I don't think that's the space for the next generation as much. So that's kind of the behind, it's just taking things that worked for me, but were really hard to piece together and making them a little more simple, a little more fun. And that seems to just have like resonated like crazy.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.roan.com, that's Roan spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing all that and opening up about that. I mean, I think the number one element behind the success of any platform these days is authenticity. And if someone were to rewind the last 2-3 minutes of this episode, they'll completely understand why Othership is, growing at the speed that it's growing at right there. Because if it wasn't for that narrative, I firmly don't believe it would be where it is today. And so that speaks volumes to you. And, with regards to church or whatever it is, Othership could most certainly, you're right. Like people are moving in a different direction, but at the same time, it could complement it in ways as well. And so I do think that's important to call out. And one of the questions that I have for you is, at the very beginning of this journey, was it an understanding of, I have a problem, I need to figure out a way to, resolve it for myself? Or was it more so a deep search for meaning, and you were just looking for the various avenues to find that meaning? Was sobriety the goal in the beginning, or was it just kind of something that happened to happen as a result of the journey that you took?
Well, prior to the business, sobriety was definitely the goal. And that's not as important to me anymore. Like, I actually had my first glass of wine in 9 years at a wedding this week. And I was just kind of like with a bunch of friends. And it's like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm just in a different stage now where I have a son and a wife and guardrails. So it's not, hey, I had a glass of wine, let's get some cocaine. And so that feels fine to me. Whereas for the first 4 years, it was very much part of my identity. And it's slacking because it's not as so much so important. So that was really, for me, like huge at the start. It was just like, hey, how can I get sober? And then how can I still have community? What's really feeling real now is like, okay, there's another, it's easy to replace one addiction with another, and the addiction was work. And so it's, hey, I'm building this thing and there's meaning for it. So I'll come and I will be in the space and I'll hear people share. And it's just like, it makes me happy every time. Like we just hosted this huge party yesterday morning, sober party with this group Daybreaker in Toronto. It's, outdoor, and there's probably 900 people there on a Sunday morning. And, I think 25 people came up to me and were like, oh my God, this changed my life, and just like being around that, it's like feels so nourishing and good and gives me energy. But there's another unhealthy, I don't want to say unhealthy, but there's another part of me that's like scarcity, need to build, make money, like, be safe, go. And there's another part, and that part's really strong because I've, lost my business, I was broke, and I don't want to go back there. And then, so that's like a very strong driver to work hard. And then there's another part that's like, yeah, I want people to like me. I want to build something that, that people admire. And that's been a strong drive too. It's like, hey, we built this thing in Toronto and we could have left it at that. And right away, we're like, no, we're going to build it in New York. And we want to be the ones that, we came up with this idea for the most part. And it's been inspired by a lot of different things, but we like have made this thing that is unique and we want to be the ones to expand it. So there's like a mix of meaning, a mix of ego, behind it. And it's both, and so I think there's just such strong drive because of all those factors. And now though, that what's really like present is being a dad and working, like I'm doing too much and I feel it's just too much, it's really hard. And it's like in my head, be productive, do this thing. And I'm trying to work through that of being more like, okay, the business is stable, it's growing, we have a big team, the team is good. My value is no longer in like doing 100 meetups and like, 5,000 emails. And it's just kind of some shifting into more of a CEO. And as a result, trying to let go of like doing, because that's what made me feel good when I'm stressed, is like doing, like feeling good, So that's, now I'm trying to think of this as a place for like, okay, how do I be a little more? So it's been part of my journey through so many challenges, like first through sobriety and now through just self-worth, which I'm like feeling now. And then now through like, can I enjoy life a little bit more than just being so paranoid and like scared?
Let me ask you, can you? Because you're at an interesting phase right now. And to top it off, you brought up fatherhood. And I'm a dad as well. I've got 2 young girls, so I totally get it. But Othership is probably your other child, and at times it might even be a more demanding child, depending on what else you have going on in life. And so I can't imagine that kind of juggle. So let's dig into that a little bit with regards to, are you allowed to enjoy yourself at this point?
I don't know, man. I don't know. Last year was really intense. Like, as I said, we were living 12 of us in one apartment on the outskirts of Brooklyn. Couldn't get open, couldn't get our permits, running out of money, construction workers threatening to come off the job. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd go down to City Hall to like try to get the permits done. I'd smoke a vape all day long and then would work at night. We'd have people in, without our permits and hope to God that we wouldn't get shut down just to like make it work. And it was, and then get home at 2 a.m. after like 4 saunas that day, and then would just be killed and would like be having breakdowns in the street. And so no exercise, pizza every night. We got home. And my son was living with us in the house, and we had no childcare, so we had to figure that out. And my wife's my co-founder too, and like my mom was like staying in the house with us, and it was crazy. And so, like I would say, health at a 0.5 out of 10. And so this year, a lot of changes. Like I've been meditating again, which was a practice for me for so long, and it's back. And I'm exercising, I'm boxing in the morning, and it's just different. I'm eating healthy again. I've had almost no stimulants this year, so no coffee, no vaping, which has made like huge difference, because those for me are like stimulants to like be in this productive mindset. And I'm trying to just be more relaxed about things. So it seems like it's working, to be honest, but I still struggle. Like I was with my son on Sunday, and if I don't do a bit of work every day, I like feel guilty. And I'm like, oh, well, I have these task lists. I got these 10 to-dos, and I just sit there ruminating in it. And so it's like a personality trait of these parts that are trying to protect me, you know? So like work hard, like be safe, but it's not that enjoyable. So I don't know, but also like when I'm with my son, it's amazing. And some moments are just like, so it's like a built-in meditation for good or bad as you two, we're trying for a second, now. And so I'm excited for that, but yeah, it's tough, man. It's just life is really full right now. And I think that's what I've chosen though, as well. So overall, I feel in a much better place than last year. I think I struggle to like have fun, but, we're making it work. And like, I wouldn't rather do anything than this with my family and my wife and my best friend. So overall,
Absolutely.
like, I think we're super grateful.
Yeah, man. No, I can't imagine that in a good way, right? Like you're learning every single day in real time, uh, and as your son grows, you know he's gonna. We talk about it all the time on this show, right? Like children are always going to pick up on what you do rather than what you say, right? And how you behave and the energy that you're putting out there. And clearly, your energy has been evolving, since he was born up until now, and will continue to evolve, and you'll continue to navigate and figure it out. And one of the things that I think you're clearly demonstrating for him is resiliency and the ability to power through regardless of what the situation is. So I think that's incredibly critical. And you had kind of spoken about this a little bit, but maybe for the listener, talk to me a little bit about how you would advise an early stage entrepreneur going through something similar with regards to some of the things that they should consider as they kind of navigate building a family and building a business.
Yeah, I think there's no advice that's good advice. Fair. There might be some advice that's good for you. I mean, there's things that worked for me, but that'd be my first thing. Is like I used to instead of sitting with my problems, which I'm getting more used to now, it'd be like, who's the expert that knows this? And that's what this person said on this podcast. And I had, a health coach and a emotional coach and then a business coach. And it just turned out I was getting so much like info, and that the root cause was I just not feeling confident in myself to solve my own problems. And with experience, that's something I wish I had done more initially. Was like I would try to absolve my responsibility by asking for help from others. And like it is important to get help, but I think it's also important, there's things like, hey, I'm setting up my HR, what should I pay for it? There's answers to things from people who've done it, but sitting more with my beliefs versus like strategic advisors and coaches was something that I wish I had done a little more earlier, is like believing in myself. So a lot of times there's like things that you will want to do with your business that are like, we run our business very counterintuitively. Like we have weeks with no meetings. We're primarily remote. We have most of our stuff is done via Slack and is async. We have these different culture days where we do these like mini retreats. Like we just do things a lot differently. And like I'm a very much not for like meeting time and trying to get rid of them. And even the way we've expanded has been different. And so all of that stuff, people will tell you, oh, you need to hire the senior person. And I'm very against hiring senior people. I believe more in hiring junior people and partnering them with coaches and like letting hardworking, smart young people like have a ton of responsibility. So just that the way I operate is like very different. And so I think at first it was like the advice you get is standard and it can cloud your judgment. And like you should think from first principles of what works for you. So that was something that's just like kind of following your own gut is like something I wish I had done earlier. And then also, yeah, like it's just, it's very hard to have a balanced life when you're starting a business. If you're also a dad, like it's impossible. So you have to make sacrifices and you just have to be ready. So it's kind of, for me, it was like, if I think of life, there's, work, relationship with your partner, family, health, friends. And so like first to go is friends. Like that's the one, and that's tough. And it's hard to, but there's seasons in life where you just can't be balanced. And so friends went first, health went second. And then it was kind of like family, which I do okay at, relationship, which I think I do really well at, and then work, which like I'm prioritizing for now. And there's just seasons. And so, yeah, you're starting something from scratch. There's going to be a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year period where that's kind of the sacrifice that you have to deal with, because you probably don't have enough money to hire all these people. You don't know what you need, and you'll make mistakes if you hire too fast. So I think that's the other, is just being ready for like, hey, this is going to be a sacrifice. Where am I choosing? And then look, time comes, and like this year, it's year 6 for us, and like health is kind of back on my priorities. Friends are still a tank. Like I'm pretty lonely, actually. Family's great. Wife is great. My friends, it's like really a gaping hole and need. But maybe that's a next year thing as we hire a bit more. So yeah, I think trust yourself, be prepared for sacrifice.
Well, you speak about health, and one of the things that's coming up a lot now, especially within our community, is the different modalities of health. And so, if you dive into it, obviously there's your physical health, but then there's your emotional health. You know, I I think that even if your physical health takes a little bit of a back seat right now, is it fair to say that you're keeping your emotional health in check as much as possible right now?
I mean, it's just look at, we have now probably 200 employees by the end of the year,
Hmm.
probably 2,000 people a day that will come in.
Hmm.
Problems, right? And
Yeah.
like, and so for me, it means like armor. It means holding boundaries. It means not being the likable person potentially. That's hard, and it's hard as like I'm a conflict avoidant person naturally, and so leaning into like learning how to deal with that has been big. And so mental health is hard because on one hand it's like dealing with conflict. You can't escape it as an entrepreneur. Like it's not like, oh, I don't really like this person, I'm just gonna reduce my time with them. Like you have to, it's like one of the main things you do as a CEO is like be in conflict, hold people accountable, create boundaries. So that is very hard on mental health. And the other is like competition, scarcity, paranoia about your business, that I'm like working through, but that's like deeply ingrained in me. So it's like, is this the right model? Should we make it bigger? What about newcomers to the market? Should we go faster? So I think mental health for an entrepreneur, I'm doing practices, but it's a struggle, for
I
sure.
I,
So
appre- I appreciate that vulnerability big time. Look, because like on the outside, someone that doesn't know you, that's not having this kind of conversation with you, sees Robbie Bent, sees Othership, and probably thinks you are flourishing and not a problem in the world. Especially, given I don't think I've heard a single person say a bad thing about what you're building. I've heard people come out of other classes and just say like it was okay, but I've only heard praise from people coming out of Othership. And that leads me to my next question. As I've kind of alluded to a few times on the show, you are at a very interesting space. But it, given where you are right now, one of your jobs is also to kind of temper yourself, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in your ear being like, you got to go here, you got to go there, you got to go here, you got to go there, you got to build, you got to expand, grow, 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 grow. And I have not been in your shoes, but I think you kind of also mentioned this. One of the biggest things that you need to moderate is not growing too quickly and growing at the right pace and going to the right geographies. How are you thinking through this? I'm guessing this is something you probably think about every single day, but talk to us a little bit about that, just given, the rapid rise in popularity.
yeah, I think we're just being smart. It's and being very prudent. So we could have went faster. We could have raised more money. I'm asked literally every day to come to a new city. I've had 400 people reach out for like franchises, licenses. And like the reality is we just can't. We opened in New York. We're one of the only bathhouse companies in, with multiple cities under their belt. And it's just fucking hard. It's kind of like building a large scale gym in some ways. And so Equinox was built over 40 years. So the way I think about this strategically is like, hey, I work with my partners. I want to do this forever. I love the product more than anything. I love my team. I'm extremely inspired by long-term founders, Whole Foods, Equinox, brands that operate for like multi-decades. Like Equinox is almost 40 years old, And so I listen to Founders Podcast every week. It's my favorite podcast. That's where I get my inspiration. And so just think of like, okay, are we cash flow positive? What is our level of risk tolerance? How fast can we expand? Can we actually like operationally deal with this? And so we're going at a good pace. Like it's fast, but it's not like crazy open 10 cities at once, go bankrupt speed. All our locations are profitable. They've all been selected in like incredible tier 1 buildings. We have a 5th one that at least should be completed in the next like month or so. But yeah, we focused on demographics and geographies where we can go super deep. So Toronto and New York, we feel between those two, we can probably have 15 locations. So it's not, I'm kind of looking for a potential third city now, but there's no first mover advantage in brick and mortar. And so there is a first mover advantage for brands, but we were the first. We're in New York. It's very clear. Now, if somebody opens beside us and their product is better, there's not a lock-in. It's not a marketplace like Airbnb where there's network effects. It is, you have to have the best product at a compelling price with a compelling brand offering with amazing hospitality. And that's what it is, And so it's just kind of like, if you sign bad leases, if you don't build appropriately, if you don't have a good staff, you will get beat by somebody who opens nearby. And so it's just like, I think, consistent focus on excellence with a long-term vision. It's just like very hard. We put in 5 years into building all these systems. And so 6 years now, and it's just like very hard to do it. And so to have the fortitude to like want to do that across multi-cities and manage so many people, I just think if it's not your real passion, it's not the best way to make money. And there's like significant risk. Like you need to sign the leases. They're long-term. You need to put up your own money. It's just, it's a challenging path. And so I feel strategically, it's like, there's no rush. Just, the next steps are like very clear, one bite at a time, and just open. So that's kind of where we'll be at for the next few years. And like, there's no need to do, 4 cities at once kind of thing. It's just be smart.
Incredibly sound and just so awesome to hear. And again, a lot of people on the audience are either entrepreneurs themselves, founders, or people who, want to be doing something like this. Just to kind of hear it directly from the source is awesome. My last question for you, Robbie, and I want to end this off on a happy note is, I was reading up on some of the comments you made about people coming up to you after classes and some of the incredible and more inspiring stories that you've heard from people. I think I read up on a mother who was donating an organ to her son, and she spoke to you after a class. And I think to close things out, why don't you give us, one of your fondest memories as, a conversation you had with someone who's attended an Othership class, just to kind of leave the audience with something to think about with regards to the experience.
I mean, stuff happens like that almost every day, but the first one that popped into my mind was just that we had our co-founders threw a baby shower, like a gender reveal for us, a surprise gender reveal. And so we were just there on a Friday night, and me and my wife, and they were like, "Hey, everyone in the sauna." And these are like customers, it's not like we're just there. And this is when we first opened. And all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, we're going to call in the sex of the baby." And I was like, they're like, our co-founders are here. We're going to do this thing. And so they have these ice balls, and they all have different smells, and some are masculine, some are feminine. So like, we throw the first one, it's lavender, and it's like, oh, it's a girl. And so it's Tutu. My wife kind of looks over and is saying, "Hey, why aren't you excited?" And I was just like, well, it's just Harry and Amanda calling in the sex of the baby. Like, they don't know. And she's like, no, like I actually, this is real. Like, they have the results. And I was like, all of a sudden went, a 1 to like, oh my God, I'm about to learn like what the sex of my first child is. So they throw the last one on. It was cedar, a masculine blend, and everybody's cheering. I was kind of like, does that mean it's a boy? And like, so emotionally touched that like, this surprise happened out of nowhere. It's happening in a space that we built. That space happened to be an old after hours nightclub where I actually used to do drugs in. So it was like a transition of me and the space itself, the physical space. So in that space, and then like customers are just coming up and crying, like, "I don't even know you, but this is so cool. Does this happen all the time? Like, I feel connected to your journey." And so that's one that just was like pure happiness of like celebrating an amazing surprise with my wife and co-founders and like customers. So that was one that was just fucking awesome.
Wow. Robbie, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for opening up with us, being vulnerable. I cannot say enough good things about my experiences at Othership, and I'm personally grateful for you and for, the community that you're cultivating. So I just want to say thanks for coming on today, my man.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you for a sneak peek next month before Williamsburg opens to the public.
I would absolutely love that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Bishoy.
You got it. Take care.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.